Ma'am, if there's nothing else, please step aside. That's what the teller said, cold dismissive. The widow had already explained. Her husband's pension was late. She'd called. She'd waited. She depended on it to get by. But no one listened. Until the man behind her, a former infantryman in worn boots, stepped out of line, walked forward and stood beside her. Not to argue, not to cause a scene, just to say this matters. 10 minutes later, a four-star general walked through the door. And what happened next reminded that bank what respect truly means. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. Most Tuesdays in Rockbridge, Virginia looked the same from where I sat up on the second floor of First Dominion Bank behind tempered glass in a locked office door. I had the view no one wanted, but everyone needed every camera feed, every transaction ID, every minor problem before it became a complaint. I wasn't the kind of manager people noticed. I wasn't supposed to be. My job was to keep things moving, keep the line flowing, keep the system fed, and that morning the system was hungry. The line snaked past the stanchions in the lobby. People shuffled, impatient and tired, shifting their weight from one leg to the other. A glitch in the regional server meant all federal payments were lagging by at least 72 hours. Veterans benefits, retirement deposits, disability assistance. No one had warned us. We just came in, turned on the monitors, and watched the fire start with the first, "Where's my check?" I leaned closer to camera 4. That was when I saw her, booth 4. The woman didn't look like trouble, and in fact, she looked like she'd apologized for causing anything small, a cardigan too big for her frame. White hair carefully pinned, the kind of careful that says she still had pride. In her hands was a folder, worn faded, held like something sacred. Her name was Edith Monroe. She wasn't new to the system. I recognized her from 2 years of quiet monthly visits. Never raised her voice, never overstepped. Just came in, asked for a printed statement, and left. But today, she was still standing there. At window 4, the camera's mic didn't pick up much, but I knew the tone of that conversation. Devin Hale, our teller, 29 sharp, haircut. Sharper tongue, leaned forward, tapped his keyboard, and then leaned back. He was already shaking his head. "I turned up the volume, ma'am. Like I said, there's nothing I can do if the system shows it's pending. You'll need to call the VA office directly." Her voice, thin, brittle, came through like a whisper. "They said it was processed, then I'm not sure what to tell you. Next, please." And just like that, he moved his eyes to the next customer in line. But Edith didn't move. She stayed exactly where she was, her hand resting on the folder. "I live off that money," she said quietly. "It's all I have." My hand froze on the mouse. I knew I should have gone downstairs, stepped in, smoothed it over. But the part of me that had worked here too long, the part that knew we were understaffed and overbooked, that part told me, wait. The lobby felt frozen on screen. Then someone stepped out of the line, a man, younger. Late 30s, maybe early 40s, tall, solid frame, but with the kind of posture you don't fake. His name was Caleb Weston. I'd seen him once or twice, came in sporadically, usually deposited personal checks. Never needed a lot, never said much. But that morning he moved, not toward the exit, not to complain. He walked right up beside Edith Monroe. He didn't touch her, didn't raise his voice, he just stood there. "Excuse me," he said to Devin, "but maybe you should take another look at her." Her case, Devin's expression didn't change. "Sir, I'll ask you to return to the line. This doesn't concern you. It concerns all of us," Caleb replied, calm, measured. A few people in line shifted, the kind of shift you see before a crowd turns. Some were annoyed, others curious. Edith looked up at him. I could see it in her eyes, even through grainy feeds. She wasn't used to someone standing with her. "Not like that." "My name's Edith Monroe," she said, voice shaking. "My husband was Colonel Vernon Monroe, Marine Corps. He passed last year. His pension has never been late." I knew that name. Everyone in this town did. Colonel Monroe had a flag-draped funeral that shut down half the city. The mayor spoke, so did a congressman. And now his widow was being dismissed like a nuisance. Still, Devin leaned back, arms crossed. "Again, ma'am. I understand, but policy is policy. We can't override VA payments." Caleb turned slightly, not aggressive, but firmer now. "What you're doing isn't policy. It's avoidance. She deserves help. She deserves respect." Devin's jaw tightened. "Toby," he called through the side mic. "You seeing this?" Yes, I was seeing it, and I still hadn't moved. Something in my chest was turning over itself. I'd worked in this bank for 12 years. I'd trained half the floor. I knew which drawer stuck and which customers brought cookies on Tuesdays. But what I didn't know, what I hadn't remembered, was what dignity looked like when someone refused to let it be ignored. And in that moment, Caleb Weston was dignity. I reached for my keycard, started to rise, then I noticed something else. Camera 5 zoomed out view of the customer seating area, panned across a row of chairs. And there he was. Ray Collier, retired artillery captain, quiet man, wore the same herringbone coat every winter, came in monthly to cash a modest check. Never asked for a thing. He wasn't watching the floor. He was watching Caleb, watching Edith. And then slowly, deliberately, he reached into the inside pocket of his coat, pulled out a flip phone, opened it, typed. One line, he hit send. I wouldn't see the message until later. Wouldn't know until everything else had unfolded. But I knew the look in Ray's eyes. That was the look of someone sending up a signal, calling for something no one in the room expected. And still Edith Monroe stood her ground. Still Caleb Weston refused to step away. And still I hesitated. Afraid not of the rules, but of what it would mean to admit I'd forgotten what we were supposed to protect. People like her, names like Monroe. Legacies too easily lost in a system more concerned with speed than soul. Outside, the wind rattled the glass. Inside, something was shifting. The tension didn't explode. It settled heavy, cold real, and then camera 1 flickered. The door rotated open and a man in uniform walked in. Tall, composed eyes like thunderclouds, and on his shoulders 4 stars. I didn't need a nameplate to recognize him. General Everett Langston had entered the building, and the room forgot how to breathe. There's a kind of stillness that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels tight, pulled like a wire about to snap. That's what the lobby of First Dominion felt like at 9:42 a.m. Devon Hale had crossed his arms and turned his body slightly away from the counter. Defensive posture, Caleb Weston hadn't moved, still standing quietly beside Mrs. Edith Monroe, like a sentry who'd decided he wasn't leaving unless and ordered. And me, I was still in my office watching. Thinking too much, acting too little, Sir Devon said again, louder this time. I'm asking you one last time to step away from the counter. Caleb didn't blink. And I'm asking you one last time to look again. Not at the screen, at her. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make a scene that made it worse. Devon tapped his headset and whispered something I couldn't catch. Probably to Cheryl in security. The camera panned left briefly as a ripple of movement passed through the line. Customers were shifting now. Phones lowered, faces alert. I could feel it happening. The moment when discomfort or discomfort crosses into confrontation. My fingers hovered over the intercom switch. Just go down there, Toby. Say something. De-escalate. That's your job. But I didn't move because part of me ashamedly, honestly wanted it to pass. I wanted Caleb to nod politely. Step back in line, let Edith be someone else's problem. Because if this became something real, it would reflect on all of us. Then Caleb took a step forward. Still calm, still respectful. But now his voice carried, "You don't know who she is, do you?" he said. Devon didn't answer. She's not just a number on a screen. She's the wife of Colonel Vernon Monroe, 3rd Marine Division, served 29 years, 2 deployments to Iraq, 1 to Kosovo. He was buried last winter in Section 60 at Arlington with full honors. His voice tightened slightly. And now his widow is standing here being asked to call a number. She's already called 4 times this week just to get the money that's owed to her. The room was utterly silent. Then Devon turned, voice sharper now. This isn't a memorial service, it's a bank. We don't handle federal disbursements directly. I'm following protocol. Protocol without compassion isn't policy, Caleb replied. I felt it then, not just tension, conviction. Something stirring in the bones of the room. Devon tapped his headset again. Security to window 4. And that's when the camera caught him. Just for a second, Ray Collier, sitting alone like he always did in the chairs by the magazine rack. Rockbridge Gazette folded neatly across his lap, a cane resting against his leg, a knit scarf tucked into his coat like he still believed in tidy things. Ray didn't move much, but his eyes, those sharp steel-colored eyes, had been watching the entire time. I saw him shift slightly. Saw the moment he reached into his inner coat pocket and pulled out the old flip phone. He didn't look rushed, didn't even look angry. He just looked. Sure, the camera didn't catch what he typed, but later I found out. He sent one line, "She's here. They're mistreating Vernon's widow. Window 4, RC. sent to a contact saved in his phone as Jen M. Oh, 10 minutes passed. Devin looked over his shoulder. The lobby security guard, Trevor, was walking slowly toward the counter, unsure of whether this was a code red or just another Wednesday customers watched. Some folded their arms. One elderly man removed his hat. I stood. I was done watching, but I never made it down the stairs because the door turned and in walked the storm. He didn't need a raised voice, didn't need a badge, didn't need an introduction. 4 silver stars sat crisp on each shoulder of a tailored dress uniform. His name wasn't spoken, but it rolled through the air like thunder. General Everett Langston. Every set of eyes turned. Even Devin froze mid-sentence. The general scanned the room. Not hurried, not confused, focused. When his eyes found Edith, something in his expression softened, like a weight had landed squarely where it belonged. He stepped forward, not toward the teller, not toward the guard. Toward her, Edith, he said, voice low, steady and reverent. I came as soon as I heard. She blinked, startled. General Langston. I didn't know. You should never have had to go through this, he said gently. Not alone, he turned to Devin. What happened here? Devin opened his mouth, closed it. I watched from halfway down the stairs, unable to blink. Then Caleb spoke. She was told her husband's pension was delayed, that she'd need to contact the VA herself, even though she already had. Twice the general's eyes narrowed slightly. Is that accurate? He asked Devin. Devin cleared his throat. That's, the procedure we follow when the system flags a delay. Langston cut him off. Calm, precise. Procedure is not a shield for indifference. He turned to Edith. I'll handle it from here. Then he turned again, this time addressing the room. Not with a speech, not with shouting. Just a sentence. This country owes you more than silence. The words fell like a stone in still water. No one moved, no one could, because deep down, we all knew. He wasn't just talking to her. He was talking to us, to everyone who ever looked away, stayed seated, stayed quiet. He looked around one final time. His gaze passed over Caleb, held there a second longer. There was respect in that glance, soldier to soldier, no words needed. And then he nodded once, the quiet kind of salute you give, not with your hand, but with your eyes. And the bank, for the first time in a long time, remembered what respect looked like. There are moments when a room forgets how to breathe. This was one of them. General Everett Langston stood at the center of the First Dominion Bank lobby, not as a man demanding authority, but as someone who carried it the way others carried a coat, worn weighty and never needing explanation. He hadn't raised his voice, but the effect was louder than any shout. Edith Monroe stood beside him now, her shoulders still trembling. Under that oversized cardigan, Caleb Weston stood a pace behind her, posture quiet but alert. Devin had retreated slightly, eyes on the marble tile, and I finally took the last step down from the staircase and entered the room. I'd been silent too long, sir, I said, voice dry in my throat. If I may, well, Langston turned his eyes to me sharp but not unkind. I cleared my throat and stepped forward, adjusting the lanyard on my neck. My name's Toby Graham. I'm the branch floor manager here. Langston nodded once. Then maybe you can help us figure out why the widow of a decorated officer has to stand in line and be dismissed in front of half the town. I swallowed hard. There shouldn't have been a delay, I admitted. But if there was, I'll find out where it began, and I'll make sure it ends here. I turned to Cheryl, still seated behind the front reception desk. Pull up account history on Edith Monroe, full cycle. Transaction notes, delay, flags, disbursement records go back 24 months. Cheryl didn't ask questions. Her fingers flew over the keyboard. Langston folded his arms slowly. She's the widow of Colonel Vernon Monroe, he said evenly, addressing the room. Not just us, but everyone still standing silently nearby. I served with Vernon for 19 years. That man led Marines through 2 wars, carried wounded soldiers out of mortar zones on his own back. He didn't ask for medals. He asked for honor. And now his wife stands here days without the pension she's earned, being told to call a hotline. No one replied. It wasn't fear. It was reckoning. Cheryl looked up from her monitor. Her face was pale. Toby, she said quietly, there was a system flag issued 3 days ago. Processing error at the regional clearinghouse. It wasn't from the VA, it was from our end. Local sync failed. The funds got pulled into a manual review queue, and no one followed up. How much is currently withheld? I asked. Cheryl's voice was barely audible. $1,762, plus a backlog of overdraft fees about 300 more. Reverse them, I said. All of them. Cheryl blinked. But I'll need an authorization. You have it, I said firmly. This isn't a question. Langston watched me, eyes narrowed but unreadable. I turned to Devin, who still hadn't spoken. Go print the cashier's disbursement, I said, keeping my tone even. Full total physical copy. Now Devin hesitated, then nodded and moved quickly toward the service printer. It wasn't much, but it was movement, and for once, it was in the right direction. I turned back to Edith. Mrs. Monroe, I said quietly on behalf of this branch. I'm sorry for the delay, for the way you were spoken to, for making you feel small when you should have been honored. It won't happen again. Her eyes shimmered behind her glasses, but she said nothing. Devin returned with the check, carefully handing it over to her like it was something fragile. Maybe it was. Langston placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You've waited long enough, he said. Then he turned to Caleb. The room, still full of hushed bodies and half-held breaths, shifted again. You served, Langston asked him. Caleb nodded. Yes, sir, Army infantry, discharged last fall. What are you doing now? I work plumbing, Caleb said, voice low but steady. Contract jobs. Couple hours here. Couple hours there. Langston studied him for a moment. You handled yourself well today, he said. Didn't escalate, didn't retreat, just stood where someone needed standing. Caleb gave a small shrug. Didn't think about it much. She reminded me of my mother. Langston nodded, then reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a business card. Thick, embossed, simple. I run a civilian military liaison office out of Richmond, he said. We work with banks, schools, local governments, anywhere veteran. Services intersect with public systems. We need people like you on our advisory board. People who remember how to act when no one else does. Caleb blinked. Langston's smile was faint but certain. People with medals forget things. People with stories remember them. You clearly remember. Caleb glanced at the card, then at Edith, then back at Langston. I'm not a public speaker, he said. You don't have to be, Langston replied. You just have to be present. There was a beat, a silence so deep it could have broken. Then Caleb nodded. Okay, I'll do it. He didn't say it like someone accepting an opportunity. He said it like someone fulfilling a responsibility. The kind that doesn't come with headlines, just with history. Outside the bank, the air had shifted. The town of Rockbridge had carried on cars, still passing, lunch hour slowly approaching. But something inside that building had changed. Mrs. Monroe stood at the sidewalk, check in hand, tears quietly drying against the wind. Caleb stood beside her, no longer just a bystander. Ray Collier had already left quietly, as if he'd known exactly when to disappear again. And me, I walked back upstairs slowly, thoughtfully. For the first time in a long time, I didn't open the surveillance window. I just stood there, letting the quiet fill the space, and wondering how long I'd been letting rules talk louder than right. 2 weeks later, I found myself in a room I never thought I'd be invited into. The top floor of First Dominion's regional headquarters looked nothing like our little branch in Rockbridge. Everything was polished, chrome glass, spotless carpet with a silence so tight it dared you to breathe wrong. But what struck me more than the space were the faces inside it. Veterans, widows, bank executives, policy leads. And at the center of it all, two people from a moment we all still carried in our bones. Mrs. Edith Monroe, wearing a navy coat with a silver pin on her lapel, an eagle perched over crossed swords. It had belonged to her husband. And seated beside her, shoulders squared beneath a borrowed blazer, was Caleb Weston. Same posture, same quiet presence. But there was something different now. A calm confidence, like a man who knew exactly why he was in the room. I sat a few rows behind them, not to speak, just to listen. General Langston opened the meeting with the kind of presence that doesn't come from rank alone. He told the story. Not the dramatic version, not the version that newspapers would crave, just the truth. A woman who waited in silence, a room that almost let her stay invisible, and a veteran who wouldn't let that happen. Then Langston paused, turned toward Caleb and said, Mr. Weston, would you speak? Caleb stood slowly. No notes, no slides, just a folded paper in one hand and a calloused palm wiping against his thigh. I'm not a public speaker, he began, and I'm not here because I did something heroic. He glanced toward Edith. I'm here because someone reminded me of my mom. The room leaned in. She used to come into banks like this after my dad died, Caleb said. Dress nice, smile polite, but walk out crushed every time some clerk called her Ma'am, like it was a chore, his jaw flexed. She didn't want Charity just to be treated like she mattered. He paused, the words sitting heavy in the air. And I don't want anyone else's mother walking out of here like that again. Then he nodded once and sat down. No applause, just stillness. Until Mrs. Monroe stood. I don't think anyone asked her to. I don't think anyone needed to. She stepped to the front without trembling. The light caught the pin on her chest. My name is Edith Monroe, she said. And I was married to Colonel Vernon Monroe for 48 years. A slight smile touched her lips. He always said that real service isn't loud. It's faithful, quiet, and most of the time thankless. She let that sink in. I didn't come into the bank expecting a parade, she continued, but I also didn't expect to be invisible. That word invisible cut through the air like a blade. I don't need pity, she said. I need people to look at me and understand that my husband's legacy didn't end. When he was buried, I carry it every day, and then her voice softened but didn't waver. Vernon used to say, no one who serves should disappear into paperwork. Silence again. Not discomfort, reflection. That's when I knew this wasn't just a policy meeting, it was a reckoning. A few minutes later, a representative from the bank's leadership stood and proposed a motion to develop a full training initiative across all First Dominion branches. Mandatory for every teller, manager, and regional staffer. Focus empathy, veteran family protocols, active listening. The proposal passed unanimously. Caleb and Edith were invited to help design it. I drove home that night beneath the darkening sky of Rockbridge headlights, sweeping across familiar roads, and thought about everything I'd seen. The next morning, I walked into our branch just after 7. I didn't go to my desk. I didn't open the surveillance feed. I gathered the team. Devin, Cheryl, Lisa Trevor from security. Everyone, we sat in the break room, coffee still warm, the bank, still quiet, and I told them the story again. Not to shame, but to teach. Then I made a decision. We weren't waiting for a training module from corporate. We'd start here. We created something small, handwritten notes for each teller station. Every person has a story. Listen like it matters. We added a blue sticker to every counter that read veteran families served with priority. Ask, honor. Listen, no press release, no photo op, just quiet change. And 2 weeks later, we hosted a small ceremony at the Rockbridge Veterans Hall. Just 50 chairs. Coffee. Flags, folded pamphlets. Ray Collier was in the front row. Same scarf, same sharp eyes. When Caleb took the stage, Ray gave a subtle nod. And Caleb, as always, didn't talk long. But what he said stuck. There are things we forget. Names, dates, deadlines, but we should never forget how to treat people, especially the ones who've already given more than we can repay. Mrs. Monroe smiled from the corner of the stage, and in that moment, the room felt right, not perfect, but better. And maybe that's enough. It's been 6 months now. Caleb still does plumbing, but part-time. He travels twice a month to regional banks, helping lead empathy training for frontline staff. Mrs. Monroe visits the branch once a week. Not for money, just to say hello. Ray Collier never said another word about that morning, but sometimes he waits a few extra minutes in the lobby just to see how the place is run now. And me, I still watch from the second floor sometimes. But I don't wait anymore. Not when someone needs to be seen, not when dignity's on the line. Because I remember the day a woman stood quietly at window 4 and someone finally stood beside her. That's what respect looks like. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today, someone isn't going hungry. And sometimes, that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Grateful Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.